Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Ben Dubose here, Paolo Alves there. Welcome back to another new episode of The Lager Line, as always served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. As always, I'm joined by Paolo, my good friend, co-host, and producer out of Portugal. You can follow him on Twitter/X at Paolo Alves NBA. Me, I'm at Ben Dubose. So as we chat on this Friday, January 12th, the last week or so has been a bit frustrating for the Rockets. Since we last recorded exactly 1 week ago, the Rockets are 1-3. They did have the feel-good win on night 2 of a back-to-back against Giannis and Damian Lillard and the Milwaukee Bucks on Saturday night, but they've lost the other 3 games, including 2 on the road in Miami and Chicago to kick off the 6-game road trip. Both were winnable in the second half, especially the Chicago game where the Rockets led by 5 with 2.5 minutes to go in overtime, but the Rockets weren't able to get it done. And now they're 0-2 on the road trip. They have a game Friday night in Detroit that almost feels like a must win to avoid an 0-6 road trip, which would be disastrous, because if you can't win at Detroit and you can't close out that Chicago game, then the 3 coming up, Boston, the best team in the NBA on night 2 of a road back-to-back, then Philadelphia and New York, I'd say you're likely to be underdogs by 6 or 7 points at least in all of those games. If you somehow can't beat a 3-35 Detroit team without Cade Cunningham and you choke away that game in Chicago, I don't know how you can have a whole lot of confidence in those other 3 games, especially with Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason still sidelined by injury. We'll get to that as we move our way through the podcast. And even if you go 0-6, it's not as if the season would be lost. Again, there's a lot of parity in the Western Conference standings as it pertains to the playoff mix or the race for the play-in tournament spots 7 through 10. It's not as if the Warriors, who I believe are the closest team to you in the 11 spot, are actually, I think Utah is ahead of Golden State now. Am I right in that, Paolo? Do you have the standings up?
Yeah, I do. Utah is currently 2 games. I mean, it's not really 2 games, but they have 2 more wins. But they actually,
They're
they
tied
also
in the
have
loss
2 more
column,
games.
but
Yeah,
they're
they
a
also
game
have.
up because they're 19-20. Golden State is 17-20.
Yeah,
Still,
but considering they're bad teams, I would actually say there's 2 games up because I'm not sure the Warriors win those 2 games.
well, true. But I would also say when you look at Utah's schedule coming up, it gets pretty difficult. They've got a number of games. The Lakers, who are starting to at least show a few signs. They've won their last 2. Then Utah plays Golden State next week. They do get the Pacers without Halliburton. They have 2 in a row against the Thunder, the Rockets, then the Pelicans. So it looks as though the Utah schedule is going to start to not get incredibly difficult, but perhaps challenging enough to where they start to fall off the pace a little bit. They've currently won 8 of their last 10, and now at 19-20, they're just a half game back of the Rockets, who, as of our recording, are 18-18, coming off a 1-3 stretch in their previous 4 games. Nonetheless, Rockets are just a half game up on the 11 spot, which would mean falling out of the play-in tournament entirely. And if you go through an 0-6 road trip, that's the kind of thing that could be difficult to recover from, even though the schedule does start to ease up for the Rockets in late January and early February. So as far as takeaways from the past week and what to watch for moving forward, we are going to talk a little bit more about the Chicago game, not just because it's the most recent, but also it's going to be one of those at the end of the year that you remember. Both for the good, the Rockets were down double digits midway through the 4th quarter and had an incredible comeback. And for the bad, that you had this heroic run from Alperen Şengün, who looked to me like prime Dirk Nowitzki, making so many plays face up, off the dribble, getting to the cup, shooting from mid-range and beyond. So many things were going his way, and yet it just felt like on a dime, the momentum of that game flipped. The Rockets couldn't get it back, and the Bulls finished on a 10-0 run to deal the Rockets what was absolutely a heartbreaking gut punch loss. And it's a good thing that the Rockets play the Pistons on Friday, because hopefully there's enough of a talent disparity, especially without Cade, that the Rockets can sort of push any hangover effect to the wayside fairly early, as opposed to if you were playing a difficult game after Chicago, that's the kind of game that I would worry about lingering. So hopefully you have one of your easier games on the schedule, even though it's on the road, that helps you to sort of push past the bad vibes and any frustration that comes from everything that went down in Chicago. Because in a normal setting, I could see that lingering. And hopefully I'm not jinxing the Rockets by mentioning how bad Detroit is, but let's just be honest. I mean, they are historically ridiculously bad at 3-35. It's very possible they don't even win 10 games this season, and they don't have Cade Cunningham, who's been their best player. So, knock on wood, not jinxing it. Crazier things have happened than the Pistons winning that game, but at least it's an opportunity on paper for the Rockets to get right after a very frustrating night in Chicago. And this is a show, because we record generally once a week. We typically don't do too much game in, game out analysis. We more focus on trends. And also, with a team as young as the Rockets, there is going to be a lot of volatility from game to game with so many young prospects. We've talked about that before. But simply because of the way the Bulls game went down and all of those high leverage reps, this will be a little bit of an exception to the rule, where we do get into sort of the specifics, the nitty gritty of that particular game, where it went wrong, and what takeaways and lessons learned the Rockets should have from that experience. And for me, aside from the injuries, which that is a factor, you're missing your best point of attack defenders in Dylan Brooks and Tari Eason, and the guy who's replaced Dylan in the starting lineup of late, Jay Tate, is just nowhere near as dynamic offensively. He can't make shots from nearly as many places on the floor, so it's hurt you there as well. You can insert Cam Whitmore, which the Rockets have increasingly done, but he's a rookie, so he's going to have lapses defensively. Bottom line, those two absences hurt a lot. And while you might can sort of band-aid your way through it for a game or two, the longer the Rockets go without those guys, the more difficult it is, and the more those holes you're trying to plug just get exposed as other teams see the clear limitations from other guys the Rockets are trying to fill into those spots. As far as Chicago, what sort of rankled me about this loss and the reaction, it's not just how heartbreaking it is, but I really don't like the narrative that I've seen, at least on my timeline amongst fans and some media, that Alperen Şengün should have just been better in the first half, and then none of this would matter. Ime Udoka had a quote about that post game as well, although I'll put a bit of an asterisk on that, because in these press conference settings, you can only, if you're a coach, respond to the question that you're asked. So if a reporter frames it in such a manner, Ime's not going to respond by randomly throwing another player under the bus who wasn't even mentioned. He's going to respond honestly to the question, and Alperen Şengün scoreless in the first half, and then out of this world with 25 points in the second half and overtime, I think 19 of them in the fourth quarter in overtime. Yeah, it's fair to wonder that if he isn't scoreless on 0 of 5 shooting in the first half, that probably gives the Rockets a buffer that can get them to the finish line, or it keeps them close enough to where if you then have that same run late in the fourth quarter where they went from down double digits to ultimately tied and forcing overtime, then that can get you over the finish line. But the reality is, look, the Bulls got off to a bad start this year, but they are not a terrible team. They're 18-21 now. They've won 8 of their last 12. They had some bad health luck, but Zach LaVine, Alex Caruso, those guys are getting healthy. Kobe White has really come on, 30 points and I believe 8 threes last night. It's not a good team, but it's not a bad team. There's a reason why at home they were actually favored by the Rockets, I believe by 3.5 going into the game, even though Houston had a better record. So it's not the kind of game, in my opinion, where you just say the problem is letting it be close at all. No, most games in the NBA on the road, unless you have a super team, and the Rockets certainly are not that, they're going to be close. And a player like Şengün, yes, there's a higher standard, but he's just 21 years old. He's just year three. This is not LeBron James where you just microanalyze every element of the game. And if he had a bad quarter or a bad half, you say, well, he's just got to be better than that. And the standard is higher for him simply because he's your best player and an all-star candidate. He's the best player on this team, but he is not nearly to the level where I think you should analyze it to that extent. The bottom line is, even though he got off to a slow start, his overall impact on the game was still very good simply because he made up for that bad start by how out of this world he was in the fourth quarter and overtime. And to me, that should be the focus, that when the reps were at their most important, and in the NBA, we know how this goes. You're not going to be able to win easily on the road. There's possessions late in the game when it's close that are more high leverage. They're more important. It's just the way the NBA works. And in those, Şengün was fantastic. So I really don't like focusing on, oh, he had a bad first half. No, he came through big time when the game really mattered. And the Rockets, largely for reasons unrelated to Şengün, let it slip away in the last 2.5 minutes of overtime. After that, they had a 5-point lead and the ball. And to me, that's where the focus should be, because the Rockets had all of the momentum in this game. And there's a couple of things you can point to. First off, the possession when the Bulls had cut it to 2, and so there was life back in the arena, and they went pick and roll with Jalen Green, and he missed a runner at the bucket. I know the last 2-minute report said there was a foul, but even just Jalen taking that shot in the first place, we know he's a guy who struggles to finish through contacts and at awkward angles. And when you had Şengün that hot, I'm not saying the Rockets drew up a play for Jalen. We should note that I believe he had 8 assists in the second half. So my guess is, clearly he was creating some mismatches with his burst and his ability to do things off the dribble. So my guess is it's a situation where they wanted to see if he could get a super easy shot at the rim or perhaps draw a help defender and then he could kick it out. And then if none of those things happen, then just dribble it back out, give it to Şengün at the top, and let him create the same way he did for much of overtime until the well ran out in the last couple of minutes. Jalen, as it turned out, and I don't think this was planned, I think it's more Jalen just thought he could make that shot, and he didn't. And again, there probably was a foul, but this is the NBA. We know that officials can be reluctant to give a whistle on that level of contact late in a close game. And we know that this is a weakness of Jalen, finishing through contact, finishing at the rim through awkward angles and navigating bodies. This is not new information. And so for Jalen to take that shot, whether you want to pin it on the coaches or Jalen himself, I just thought it was irresponsible with how much Şengün had it going. The other factor, and I'm not trying to throw Cam Whitmore under the bus because he had a fabulous game overall, and he's been a revelation the last couple of weeks as he's gotten to play more, given the injuries to Dylan and Tari. Last night, 16 points, 50% shooting. He got to play basically all of overtime. Top line numbers, great. All in all, it's a really encouraging performance. With that said, specifically the last 3 minutes of overtime, they went through Şengün, the possession before Jalen missed his shot at the rim, and he had a wide open Cam, that is, 20-footer that could have given the Rockets a 7-point lead that probably would have been a dagger. He missed it. He also had a dunk attempt. He also could have tried to lay it up that could have put the Rockets in front. He missed that. Now you can argue maybe there should have been a foul, but the bottom line is the same with Jalen. Officials are going to be reluctant to blow their whistle in that situation a lot. And he needs to be either powerful enough or crafty enough to finish through. He didn't. The dagger shot for the Bulls that put them up 4. Kobe White, a guy who had 30 points and I believe 8 3-pointers, Cam lost him on his rotation and he buried a wide open corner 3 that put the Bulls in front to stay. Rockets never got within a possession from that point forward. And then whatever last gasp they had, it was the last minute. Cam had a wide open 3 and he missed it. And it felt a little bit like the Jared Allen meme, the lights were brighter than expected. And that's fine. Cam is just 19 years old. He's a rookie. I get the fact that even if it doesn't go well, just putting him in the super high leverage situations, it's useful. You can learn from the mistakes, even if you make these mistakes. That's completely fine. But here's where I get frustrated. If Cam's development and his learning is so important that even when he's struggling, you don't turn back to a veteran like Jeff Green, who has started the second half in that spot. Not saying they should go to Jayshawn Tate. No, that's just too terrible for the spacing. And there's a reason why midway through the Chicago game, Ime pulled the plug on that and said, no, I'm going to start with the front court of Jeff, Jabari, and Şengün. You easily could have gone to Jeff. They didn't. They clearly wanted those reps to go to Cam. Okay, then if we're going to talk about the first half, why was Jayshawn Tate, who's been struggling for a while, getting those reps ahead of Cam Whitmore? Why has it been, and this goes back well beyond the Chicago game, why has it been like pulling teeth to get any consistent rotation run for Cam at all, even though he generally has played well when he's gotten opportunities this season? I'm not just talking about the month that he spent in the G League. No, it's really since he came back, he's looked better. He's been able to score efficiently whenever he's gotten opportunities. And yet it's taken until both Dylan and Tari got hurt for him to get consistent run. And even in that context, if it's a close game in the second half, we see his stints really limited to 3 or 4 minutes unless he clearly has it going. If the development of Cam is so important that even when things are going terrible for him, as they were late in that Chicago game, and you're just going to ride it out, why are you not giving him reps in other situations that are going to someone like Jayshawn Tate that is clearly not a part of your longer term future? I'm not saying any of these are just egregious mistakes by the organization, because as we've talked about plenty in the past, balancing multiple timelines is difficult. And this is a season where the Rockets do want to aggressively chase wins. We've talked about avoiding the rot of losing that's defined the last couple of years, and they've largely done that. Again, even though they've lost 3 of their last 4, still 18 and 18. I think any of us would have taken that going into the year. Ime Udoka is a serious coach of the year candidate. Not trying to take away any of that. All of that is valid. It's still a very good season overall. Yet the Rockets are not trying to win a title this year. It's about the longer term development. And those two things can be tough to balance. And so when I say that, giving Cam such a long leash in overtime and it arguably cost you the game, I'm not saying you can't argue that it's worth it, but then to look at that in the context of other decisions, it doesn't feel consistent. And I think that's sort of an occupational hazard of when you're trying to balance the present against the future. It's easy to get a little too biased in one direction and perhaps shift to the other extreme in another circumstance. It's a very fine line to walk, and it's very easy to find yourself a little off balance at times. Again, I guess to sort of wind up my thoughts before I turn things over to Paolo, for me, there's a little too much of, I don't want to say Şengün blame, because obviously people recognize how incredible he was down the stretch of that game. But I do think people are being a little too arrogant for my taste with regards to things that happened earlier in that game and acting as if the Rockets are above the Bulls. And if they had just done a few things better early on, then nothing that happened late should matter. No, the discrepancy between the Rockets and most teams, especially on the road where they're just 3-12 this season, it's just not that big. Most games are going to be close. And when we're talking about a season where now you're in the 10 spot in the West and right on the verge of falling out of the play-in range, things are going to be decided on the margins. And whether you can close out games that are close where you have certain advantages, that can be the difference in winning 45 games, 40 or 35. And so to me, the focus should be on, why did the Rockets let such a golden opportunity slip away? Why did this incredibly memorable flurry from Alperen Şengün go for nothing? And I'm not saying that any of the mistakes, be it the one possession from Jalen, whatever the coaches were looking for there, or everything to do with Cam's situation, I'm not saying any of those aren't defensible. I understand where those mistakes came from, and the Rockets are trying to balance a lot of different interests in this season. So I get it. It's not something that I'm saying that Ime Udoka or Rafael Stone or ownership or anybody else should be raked over the coals for. I'm just saying that to me, this was a situation that was frustrating because it felt like the Rockets had everything going their way. They couldn't close it out. When Şengün hit that mid-range shot to put him up 5, the look in his eyes, that was as close to an alpha as I've seen since the days of James Harden. That was special. And then it felt like the Rockets largely went away from him. And by the time they went back to him late in the game, they were down multiple possessions. And of course, at that point, you're feeling like you have to shoot a 3 to try and make up that deficit relatively quickly because you're running out of possessions. It just feels like a massive missed opportunity. And while I think I understand why certain mistakes were made, I wish we were talking more about those mistakes and less about, we shouldn't be framing as though, oh, the Rockets, if they take the game seriously, they beat the Bulls by 10 or 15 points because they're just better. No, that's not how this team is. This is a 500 team, and they could be either a little bit above 500 or a little bit below. It's going to depend on how they execute at the margins. And this was a game where when it was there to be won, they didn't execute. It's frustrating. And I guess that's what I take out of it much more than any, how did they fall behind by 10, 12 points? Why do they have to come back? It's just very frustrating for me because it felt like that was their game. They let it go. And that's the exact type of 50-50 game that you need to win when you're in a close battle with several other teams for one of those Western Conference play-in spots. Paolo, what were your takeaways after seeing the way that all went down?
It was a really rough game. Right. Just because they gave us hope only to take it away afterwards. But I was just overall, I was pretty displeased about the effort. And I think the reason we lost the game, to me, and I promise you I watched the game, even though this kind of looks like box score watching, but free throws shooting 60% from the free throw line is unacceptable. And that goes a little bit to Şengün, who went 3 of 8. I think we missed 8 free throws. He missed 5 of them, especially in the clutch. Jalen missed a free throw in the clutch as well. That's more than the edge that won or lost you the game. And I think the biggest thing without Tari and Dylan Brooks is that we are a team that really struggles to score. We're not an explosive offensive team, and so when we have those kind of brain dead moments where we fall asleep for 40 seconds and we just let the opponent score at will during those 30 seconds, unless the opponent is really cold from 3, that gives us 6-9 points or 6 to 9 point swings in any given minute. And if this happens once a quarter, it becomes really hard to win, especially for a team that struggles so much to score, because the way we win games is by having the edge on those second chance opportunities, on the defensive end, on grabbing rebounds, on those things, because we know we aren't going to win a shootout offensively. So when a team makes it close, like it being tied in offensive rebounds is bad enough to lose us the game because we need to have an edge on all of these fronts, right? And I think Tari and Dylan, because of how good they are defensively and because of how active they are, win us extra possessions in all the ways that I described, and they kind of help us, since they're focused all the time, help us not have those moments quite as much. And I felt like there were just moments in the game where you feel like the game's slipping away, and it feels like the effort's not there, even though they're putting in the effort throughout the game. But then there's those off minutes that just completely kill it and make it really hard for us to win.
By the way, we
That's
should also mention the shooting discrepancy, and that's why it makes it more frustrating to lose. This game reminded me a little bit of the Indiana game where Tyrese Halliburton went off. That was when Dylan first got hurt, in that the Rockets' effort deserved better, but they just had terrible shot luck. The Bulls were a bottom 10 team in 3-point makes and accuracy. They shot 19 of 47 from distance, over 40%. Rockets shot 11 of 45. So for this game to be as close as it was, despite the Rockets, who are a better 3-point shooting team on paper, making 8 less threes on similar volume, that's a 24-point gap. That's why it feels like such a missed opportunity, because the Rockets played so well in other areas. And yet, because they didn't execute at the little things, the free throws, that's a very good point. 12 of 20, there's so much meat you left on the bone there, then you got a loss out of a game where you deserve to win. And those really hurt because when you play that well and you're a 500 team, you sort of know in the back of your mind that, hey, a future game, you may not play as well. And the reason I bring up the Indiana game, that's one where the Rockets were close, had the lead in the last 2 minutes, despite the fact that I think they had 13 or 14 less made threes. And then they lost the next two games to Phoenix and Philadelphia. And it's one of those things. It's like, well, where did that 3-game losing streak come from? And it's like, well, you wasted a game where you played really well, but you had terrible shot luck. And that's what it feels like a little bit this week. And hopefully playing Detroit, a terrible team, will be the cure to make sure this one doesn't spiral to at least 3 straight losses. Because, that game Monday in Miami, even without Jimmy Butler, the Heat are the type of disciplined team that I knew going in, especially in Miami, would be a tough matchup for the Rockets. And it feels like in that one, Fred VanVleet went 7 of 14 from 3, but it was going to be incredibly difficult to win that game, especially with the defense of Bam Adebayo and Eric Spoelstra keeping Şengün in check for much of the first 3 quarters of that one. And it just felt like that Fred going off from 3 was the reason you didn't totally get blown out, when otherwise you would have, with both Jalen and Jabari not shooting well and Şengün not really getting going until the fourth quarter. And then you flash forward to Wednesday, you did so many other things well, but Fred shot just 3 of 14. He's your high volume 3-point shooter. And when he doesn't have it going, then yeah, you are going to be more prone to having an 11 for 45 night from 3, which they did. So to bring it full circle, that's where this game really is frustrating for me, is that for them to be this close, despite having a shot luck discrepancy that vast against a team on paper that's their advantage going into the game. That's one of the things the Rockets do better than the Bulls. And for Houston to have that opportunity, despite the shot luck variance, and still not be able to close, it just feels like a game they really, really needed to win. And it's just a huge missed opportunity. And that's why, I sort of go back to the Indiana game. It's just one of those where, yeah, it's sort of glass half empty, glass half full. You can look at it after the game and be like, hey, you played really well, even though you lost, a bad break here or there, some sloppy execution that can be cleaned up. That's the glass half full way to look at it. But the glass half empty way is you sort of wasted one of your really good games. What's going to happen coming up, especially with these injuries and you're not at full strength, when you don't play that well? That's what worries me. Am I off base in any of that?
No, I totally get what you mean, right? This team is not a true contender, mostly because of the offense, and so you have to take the chances. And a massive difference in the overall record for the season will be how capable you are of taking the games that you do have a chance in, because we aren't good enough to be competitive in every single game, and so there's
Right.
games that are going to be scheduled losses, and the ones that aren't. I mean, you'd rather be unlucky in the games that are scheduled losses. Like, let's imagine it's a sample of 4 games, and you'd rather get really unlucky in the scheduled losses because you're going to lose them anyways, and go 0-4, but then get really lucky in the games that you do have a chance to fight for them. And in that, with normal variance, you'd go 2-2, but you go for a no instead, rather than going 1-4 instead of going 0-4 when you're expected to lose. So you need this to say, you'd rather get the luck in these close games, and it does feel like a missed opportunity. But at the same, and it feels even more frustrating because of what I said earlier, because we felt like we lost the game in these random plays, and Chicago rebounds the ball in a really weird way. They don't really box out. They just, they're cutting around, trying to jump at it, right? And I feel like the Rockets weren't really ready to rebound the ball. I thought they got so many rebounds this way. I was kind of, really triggered by it. If you go to my Twitter page, I was just harping on the rebounding the entire time. It was really triggering me. But I wanted to touch on something that you said about the Cam Whitmore issue, and he played 33 minutes. He was in the closing lineup, and you could make the argument that his minutes should have been bumped up sooner. And I do agree. I would rather have him play. If it were me, I would play him right away, the minutes State's playing, plus the ones that he has already earned by himself. because he's better, because he has more upside, or because he's better offensively and because he has more upside, and because of how much easier he makes the game for other people on offense, even though he doesn't make the right reads a lot of the time. I would do it, but I understand why Ime has taken the approach that he has, because on a winning team, you're expected to have to earn those minutes, and being hot for 2 or 3 games shouldn't earn you 30 minutes at a time. So I can see Ime like intentionally making it tougher on him to earn those minutes. And if you're good enough, you will eventually get those minutes anyways. I don't think it's a Christopher type of situation where you're going to hurt his confidence. He's going to go back to the G League and basically never be what you projected him to be. I think Cam's talented enough that he'll surpass whatever you throw at him, and he has, because I think at this point he will be a part of the rotation no matter what, or at least I hope he will. And I think long term, taking this approach will yield better results. So I'm not really that mad at the way Ime took the approach Ime took, especially because I think a lot of people are hype. I love Cam, right? I can make Anthony Edwards and Jalen Brown comparisons for weeks, right? But I do think that a lot of people are kind of not taking into account that he does fall asleep defensively, and that some of those mistakes, some of those minutes or singular minutes where the team gives up a bunch of points in just a minute and then plays good defense for like the next 3 or 4, a lot of those come from Cam just not paying attention, or Cam not boxing out, or Cam spacing out defensively. And then offensively, he also still takes some dumb shots, and that dunk that he missed in the clutch, he could have kicked it back out to a wide open shooter. He got the shot clock to reset. He got the rebound. The shot clock was reset. They could have spaced back out and gotten another offensive possession. He tried to dunk it through 2 people. Right? He's not playing perfect, but and so because of that, I don't mind you taking the accountability type of option when it comes to the rotation. But at some point, I think at this point you just have to insert him into the rotation, because he brings something that we just don't have off the bench, which is the scoring, right?
I would consider starting him, by the way. That would be my preference. If you're going to do this, just lean into Cam and his long-term development, because even the warts, I don't think it's like Jayshawn Tate is clearly better, and the upside is there with Cam. I think as long as Dylan and Tari are out, I would put Cam ahead of Tate. I guess you could make the argument for Jeff, although Jeff's given that bench unit a shot in the arm for much of this season. I think if it were me, I would start Cam on Friday night in Detroit, assuming that Dylan and Tari are still out.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. I was mostly talking like more long term.
Yeah, I understand.
Eventually
Yeah,
off the bench, just having the
yeah, just saying
entirety
very
of
short
the
term.
Tate minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'd be fine with you starting him. It's not like it's a long term thing, and
Yeah, for me, it's just the frustration is sort of it feels like going between extremes. It's like going between, struggling to get him any sort of consistent minutes at all, to then in that situation, because he had a good first 4 quarters, that he gets just an indefinite leash in overtime. It feels like you could be a little more of a blend in which, I guess, if things clearly aren't going his way, you can make a shift while the game is still there to be won, but you can have a little bit longer of a leash in the first place to make sure that he's not going, multiple games without having a realistic chance. You see what I mean?
yeah. As I said, I'm all for just giving. If it were up to me, he'd get the minutes outright from the beginning, just because I'm not that high on Tate, and it was
Right.
bound to happen that the shooting was eventually going to come back down to earth. And to as much as Tate gets extra possessions and does all the little things, he also counteracts those with some boneheaded plays and fouls that he's just frustrated and he'll foul and not remember that we're in the bonus, or he'll foul for. It's not like Tate is this unfallible machine for the minutes. He also
Yeah,
has flaws,
it's
and
really funny because I've pointed out that one area where the defense has clearly gotten worse, besides just not having the talent that they normally do, now that you don't have Dylan and Tari, they also panic a lot. And when you get in a game like this one against Chicago, where they're unexpectedly making a lot of threes, then you see a lot of those guys way overhelping and overcommitting. And Yes, the young guys, I would say, are at the forefront of that list. Guys that haven't been there, done that, they get a little bit rattled. But stunningly, Tate does as well. For a guy in his upper 20s, it feels like, and there was one three he fouled on at the end of the first half that was really egregious. And I think maybe that sort of sealed the deal in Ime's mind to start the second half with Jeff. But for a guy who's good defensively and is advanced in his professional basketball career, it's strange that he is at the forefront of that trend, but it feels like he is, right?
You basically took the words right out of my mouth. I think eventually, once we can not play Jeff as a small ball five with the second year, I think eventually they will get a big either via trade or via free agency. Bismarck Bjornbos currently a free agent. Eventually, I think Jeff will go to the four, and even if you're not giving the minutes to Cam, you won't have the role for Tate regardless. So I think I think Tate's the typical player, and with Salas it was the same thing where he makes a lot of positive plays and he plays with a lot of intensity, which means the head coaches will always fall in love with him, right? Because he brings that toughness. But at the same time, sometimes you're so enamored by the typical, hard-nosed defensive guy that you forget how much he isn't contributing on the other side of the ball and how many things, especially spacing wise, and those one-handed plays that he makes from time to time that you just chalk up to, oh, he's trying really hard. You lose track of how many intangibles you're giving up offensively because he's there as well. And this is not to take a dig at it. He's been here for a while now, and we at this point we know what he is. And at the beginning of the season, we knew that I think it was a 39% three-point shooter was not what he was, no matter how much his 5 defenders on Twitter will say that, oh, he's finally learned how to shoot. It was always unrealistic. And I still think, besides, beyond that, I think some team will still value him. Some team will still have that role available. I think the Celtics were one of the teams rumored to be rumored to be interested. But for this team, we already have enough of what Lechante brings. We need something on the other end. So a 45 seconds or a 3 possession span where we fall asleep defensively and we give up a 3 and a couple of layups, and we all of a sudden just give up 7 points. And if we had a lead, the lead's gone. And if we didn't have a lead, the game's out of reach. So those 45 seconds don't take as much to recover from, because basically every single shot that we're taking feels like a stretch to go in. It feels like we're forcing, like on offense, besides Jabari threes and Fred threes and Sengun post-ups, most of the possessions or the shots that go up, you don't really expect them to go in. And so maybe and this is going to sound really rudimentary, but maybe get a guy that can put the ball in the basket, since this is the point of the game. And I think Kem Whitmore is exactly that guy. And if you can, add what he does offensively in contributing to winning, to giving minutes to someone that you're projecting long term to have a larger role, it just makes sense for everyone.
Yeah. We've talked in the past about this being a good time to sell high on Jae'Sean Tate, and I'm becoming increasingly convinced of that, assuming that at least one of Dylan or Tari is able to come back, but I believe they will. Neither injury is considered especially long term. Dylan with the oblique, Tari with a stress reaction in his leg going back to the preseason. Even with all the injuries, it still feels like Tate is playing too much, and there's a path for Cam to get even longer run. And so just imagine what this is going to look like, trying to play Cam and build on this momentum, which, even though I'm nitpicking the way he played in overtime, again, I do acknowledge overall it was still a really strong game for him. So imagine how much more difficult it's going to get to give Cam the run he needs to develop when Dylan and Tari get back. I think we've been sort of on this theme for a while of why this is the right year to move on from Tate, the bodies that you have, and now with Whitmore showing more flashes, to me, it's becoming even more clear. And as we mentioned in the past, this is the window for you to maximize that value, where the team acquiring him would have not only this season, but next year as well, on a relatively cheap rate based on the bargain contract the Rockets got Tate on a couple of off seasons ago when they gave him the deal a little bit early in exchange for getting friendlier terms. Team option this offseason, which will almost certainly get picked up because even though it is a struggle for him offensively, he still provides enough value defensively. And I still think he'd be a valuable player in a different team construct. If you put him on, we've talked a lot about the limitations of this team offensively. If you put him on a really good team that has a lot of different scoring options and he can compartmentalize, he'd be very valuable. Phoenix to me is a perfect example of a team that gets offense from so many sources that needs guys like that to do the little things, to do the dirty work. And if he can sort of star in his role, then that would be an ideal fit. But in Houston, he's going to be stretched more than he should be based on the limitations of this team. And then you combine it with this being a season where you're not trying to win a title anyway, and development being at least a partial focus, then yeah, a 28-year-old Jae'Sean Tate is probably going to have more value somewhere else. Before we move on to a couple other topics that are more bigger picture, including the trade deadline, which I want to touch on before we close out the show, one other angle that I want to discuss from the Chicago game that we've buried a little bit because when you lose a heartbreaker, you're going to focus on what went wrong. That's natural. But Jabari Smith Jr., 18 points, 15 rebounds, clamped DeMar DeRozan multiple times down the stretch. He's just 20 years old. He's younger than Amen Thompson. I feel like there's a segment of this fan base because Jabari's game isn't as sexy from a playmaking or a scoring perspective that's a little too low on him. For whatever reason, I think it's because Cam has started to break out. We've seen a new wave, at least on my timeline, of sort of ranking the prospects. And to me, Jabari should clearly be number 2. I understand. I guess if you were to look at the 6, All P is clearly the 1 because he's an all-star candidate right now. And Jalen is clearly the 6 because he's your 3. He should be the most developed. And yet to this point, he's not. To me, the way I look at the 6, and again, I'm not saying Jalen can't break out of it, just saying where they are now, it's sort of like All P is the top tier, Jalen is the bottom, and then you have Jabari and Tari, Amin and Cam. And Amin and Cam, of course, are rookies. So the sample is very, very limited. But whenever a guy like Cam has a relatively good game, which last night was, even considering the low lights in overtime, then I understand the enthusiasm and you see the power, the athleticism, the ridiculous talent that made him a top 5 prospect on most boards going into last year, might have made him number 1 overall this year. It's very easy to sort of fall in love with that. But when you look at the totality of the package, what Jabari Smith Jr. is giving you this season, since Thanksgiving, he's averaging nearly 10 rebounds per game. Ime Udoka talked about that earlier this week in that great interview with Vanessa Richardson. That's been the big leap for him, especially on the offensive glass. His true shooting percentage is nearly 60 because he doesn't take bad shots. If he has it going, he'll be a little more aggressive, but he's not going to waste possessions. If it's not his night, you can give it more to All P or one of your more high upside creators. He knows his limitations. This year, his threes are going in at nearly 40%, which is phenomenal for a guy who's 6'11" and has a high release point to where he can almost always get that shot off. It's just because he's not a dynamic scorer or playmaker, I think it's very easy to sort of fall in love with a guy like Cam or Amen when they have clear flashes, or even Tari when he had that stretch in early December. But to me, Jabari is clearly your second best prospect. Bleacher Report had a ranking the other day of top NBA players younger than 22. All P was 4, Jabari was 6. And I believe Amen was 13 and Jalen was 20. And I think that's fair. You could certainly argue to put Cam on that list, but I think because, especially at the time of publication, he had played so little and he did fall to 20, even if it was for silly reasons, he did fall to 20. I understand why a national publication wasn't going to put him on that list just yet. And they're going to give some deference to Jalen, who, even with the struggles and the inconsistency, is actually playing. But I just think a lot of Rockets fans are a little low on what Jabari's doing simply because his game doesn't have that sex appeal. There's value in the certainty. The fact that he stays within himself, the versatile defense, the high IQ, the elite shooting from 3-point range, and these other guys. Look, Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore have flashes, but they also have clear lowlights, which, again, Cam, even though it was on the balance a very encouraging game, he was also arguably the reason why you lost in overtime. And Tari Eason, I know from that same Vanessa interview, Ime Udoka pointed out, and I've heard this behind the scenes as well, that Tari is your best player on a per minute basis. I haven't actually seen it because a lot of that is, their in-house proprietary analytics models. But I certainly buy it. The net ratings speak incredibly well to Tari when you look at the on-off differentials and those types of things. But the reality is there's questions about whether he can be scaled up. There's lots of guys who are analytics darlings in smaller roles, but they're not able to take it to 30 plus minutes per game, being a legitimate starter, at least in terms of minutes per game, and scaling up that level of impact. And until Tari does it, and this year he's had struggles really from the outset with the stress reaction, you do have to worry about the workload. The fact that Jabari is durable, he sprained the ankle a week ago and only missed one game, which is just incredible. The fact that he's able to play 30 plus minutes per game, he stays within himself, he gives you value on multiple ends of the court, he's shooting threes at an elite level, the ability to guard so many different positions, the fact that DeMar DeRozan is a guy who's had so many buzzer beaters over his career. For the Rockets to trust Jabari at just 20 years old, to leave him on an island, and for him to reward that level of trust, that's phenomenal for a guy that is that young and not even to the halfway point of year two. And I just feel like sometimes people sleep on Jabari because his game, it's very steady, but the highs are usually not as high as they are for a Cam Whitmore, what we hope will be an Amin Thompson, or even, a Tari Eason or Jalen Green. And so I think because of that, because the highs aren't quite as high, I think at least some people in this fan base aren't as high on Jabari as they should be. For me, while he's not Şengün, not saying Jabari is an all-star, he's already a winning player. He's a clear contributor. And last night, I just want to make sure that we give Jabari his due. Even though the Rockets lost that game, they deserve to win it because of Jabari Smith Jr. And so I think, we don't have to do our rankings today. We talked about it, Paolo and myself, earlier today, and we said, you know what, let's hold off on the full-blown rankings until the All-Star break when there's a longer stretch without games. But boy, I think anyone who seriously looks at this Rockets team and what this core six has shown you to date, I don't see how in the world you don't have Jabari second based on what he's shown you to this point. Am I off base in any of that?
No, I'm with you. I'd have Jabari second as well. He made the step this year that we needed him to make, in the sense that he went from being one. He should be a contender for most improved. I believe he improved more than Şengün. Şengün was just already good, just got more usage. Mm-hmm. He went from one of the worst players in the league, if not the worst, to someone who was able to knock down shots, 39%. Someone who's efficient even within the arc. It's not one of those guys that's a really good shooter but can't do anything inside. Not anymore, at least. He's cutting, he's finding opportunities around the rim, he's grabbing boards, and he's being able to play versatile defense across multiple positions, which is like he right now has already achieved what he needs to achieve to be a really positive player and really useful player for the Rockets for the next 10 years. At 20 years old, which means, and I think because he already achieved this, a lot of people are forgetting that he is still 20 years old. He still has all of the upside. He can still become, if he entered the draft, having like if you showed anybody this NBA season right now and you put him in the draft, he'd go number 1 this year. Last year, he'd probably go number 3 at worst. And I think that speaks volumes, because I think just because he already got into the NBA doesn't mean that the upside gets cut short. We fantasize so much about the upside on prospects that we sometimes forget. The guys that are already here, no matter how much they improve across 1 year, they still retain upside going forward. And Jabari has shown us this year as well, flashed some of that upside as a shot creator. As the KD type of scoring, the jump shot that you can shoot over anybody, and so he has an incredibly safe floor, which it didn't look like it last year, but now he looks like the prospect that we expected him to be coming out of the draft. Plus all of the development that he has made in scoring inside the arc, which was and with his handle and everything, and so. At this point, you already know that he's going to be an incredibly useful player. I think he's going to be, a Jaren Jackson Jr. type of player that's better defender on the perimeter and worse inside. but then you get the archetype, and he still retains a lot of upside as potentially being an offensive option. So I'm with you. I think a lot of people are taking what he's doing for granted, just because this is what he was expected to be at the very least. But that's a pretty high bar, and he has shown, that was what he was expected to be at least when we were drafting him. You expected him to be, this was, while it was the floor, it was also pretty close to the ceiling, because the handle was bad, scoring inside was bad, finishing through contact was bad, and so because of that, you couldn't really project him to be the type of scorer that could be an option on a good team. But he has worked on all of those deficiencies before he actually became good at what you expected him to be good. And so sometimes I think people are forgetting that how much better he got at those other things. And I really think this guy's a limit. I think Klingon is just, at this point, he's just an all-star, and you
Right.
can't put anybody else at number one. But especially when you compare him to other guys, I mean, Tari has some upside, and he's already contributes to winning a lot, but he doesn't have the same upside that Lipari has. This doesn't look like it. I think he's 2 years older, or 3 years older, something close to it. Jalen's just, not shown it at the NBA level at this point. Cam has shown it for very little time, and a man has shown some of the stuff, some of the intangible stuff, but when it comes to scoring and when it comes to this two-way superstar downhill rim pressure machine, he hasn't shown that upside yet. And so you have Tlipari, who has already shown enough to get to a certain level, and he still retains all of that upside. And I think he's runaway number 2 if you had to rank them, which is crazy, because if you asked me before the season, he would be towards the bottom, just because of the same reason Jalen's towards the bottom now, because he hasn't shown it at the NBA level, but now he has.
Yeah, absolutely. One more grievance I want to get to, and I want to emphasize this is not a grievance with Tari the player, but with Tari the situation. I mentioned in talking about his situation earlier, the fact that there are questions about being able to scale up his production as good as it is on a per minute basis. And this season, of course, he's never going to be 100%. Let's just be honest, until next fall, until he gets an extended period of rest for that leg. That's just the nature of stress reactions. And Ime Udoka, in one of his interviews this week, acknowledged it. He said they wanted him to be closer to 90% than 70%, which is why they're giving him a week or two off now, as opposed to treating it on a game by game basis. And if the pain was too much, giving him that night off. They're hoping that now they can get it closer to 90% to where they don't have to manage him quite as tightly on a day in, day out basis. So the grievance I have with Tari and the inability to scale him up certainly hurts the potential ceiling of this team, because as much as we can talk about what Tari would look like if you were able to play him 30 or 35 minutes, at this point you can't. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the leg is at the forefront of that list. I do wonder if this season would be better off if they had been more aggressive in just doing this in December, when it was first clear that whatever happened during the preseason had not gone away. Because there's a reason why he was questionable time after time in the injury reports, even when he did play. And he did have games off. It felt like once every week to 10 days, they'd shut him down for a game. So even if, we heard Ime say this week, and I think that maybe he was lying and the pain was worse than he acknowledged, I guess that explains part of it. But it's not like the organization knew nothing. There's a reason why he was on the injury report so frequently. There's a reason why he took games off. And December was a stretch where you had all the home games. The schedule was a little softer, and you were healthy for the team as a whole. There were little nicks and bumps, but nothing like the oblique strain that Dylan's been dealing with the last couple of weeks. I know hindsight is 2020, but to me, it's at least fair to wonder, should they have tried to deal with this at a friendlier stretch of the schedule, when A, you weren't going to be facing difficult opponents on the road, and B, you would have had close to a full team outside of Tari to try and make up for his absence. Because this stretch right now, losing both Dylan and Tari at the same time, it's tough, because again, Tate can fill the defense, but there's the obvious hits to your spacing and offense. Cam has upside, and it's exciting when he plays, but because he's a 19-year-old, you're also prone to going through some disastrous stretches like what happened in the last 3 minutes of overtime. So it's sort of like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And there's just not that option of stability, which both Dylan and Tari are. And so certainly you didn't know that Dylan in particular would be the guy hurt. However, I do think it would be fair to assume that as you get into 2 months of the season after passing both November and December, at some point there was going to be a soft tissue injury for somebody. And with a guy like Tari, who's sort of a Swiss Army knife in terms of being able to fill a lot of different roles, if you lose someone else due to an injury, and then that happens to be the period that you feel compelled to shut Tari down because you tried everything else and it's not working, then yeah, whatever role that is, I mean, maybe it's not Dylan. Maybe it's, let's say, hypothetically, Jalen had gotten hurt. And we've talked a lot about Tari being a hedge for Jalen. Well, what do you do if both Jalen and Tari are unavailable? That puts you in a tough spot as well. I know Cam could theoretically fill that, but again, you'd be running into some of the same issues that you do at times with Cam now. It's difficult to play a 19-year-old in the NBA for a number of reasons. So I'm not going to say it's a clear mistake because number one, I don't have access to all the medical information. I'm just making informed guesses as a media member from the outside. But seeing how this turned out, I think it's at least fair to be a little bit frustrated that the Rockets didn't try to proactively deal with this earlier and let it and just deferred it to a point in which now you're missing two guys. And it just feels like there's been multiple games over the past week where if you had one of those guys, you almost certainly would have won. But because you're without both at the same time, it's just too much. And now it feels like you're staring down the barrel of perhaps a 1-5 road trip as a result of these absences. And even if, Ime mentioned yesterday that he's hopeful that Dylan could come back before the end of the road trip, but even if he does come back, again, the back half of it, these three games in Boston, New York, and Philly are so difficult on paper that even if you do have a full strength team, you're still going to be a clear underdog because you're not as good. I'm not saying anyone made a clear mistake, but I do think it's fair to at least be a little bit frustrated by not being proactive with Tari's situation. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna pretend like I know anything about, how the healing and how these injuries work. I do think it's unfortunate that we our two main defensive enforcers are out at the same time. And if this is something that you could have predicted that was going to happen with Tari, then the timing was pretty poor, and they probably should have managed it. But on the other hand, I also understand that this is a season where every game matters, and I can see how you could get lost in the moment in trying to win every game. Um, and instead of planning it out a little bit longer term, well, maybe it was a misdiagnosed. it's it's
It's sort
definitely
of,
rough, and I do agree with you that the past few games, at least the Miami Heat one and this Chicago one, I would say we probably win if we have one of them.
yeah. The
um
only one I think it's a clear loss is Minnesota last Friday. They're just a better
oh
team
yeah,
and they were
completely
dominant on
outclassed.
that night. But other than that, yeah, these games where you haven't had both of those guys, they've been harmful. And again, I'm sympathetic to the position. The reason I bring it up as we try to wind down the pod, it just sort of goes full circle to what we were saying earlier. It's difficult to balance competing interests, both the present and the long term. And in this case, it feels like the long term of Tari's development was compromised a little bit because they felt like even if he's 70, 80%, having him out there was their best chance to steal a couple of games in December. And maybe it was. And again, I'm not saying there was a clear mistake. I guess the way it reminds me a little bit of some of the dynamics we were talking about earlier with Jay Tate and Cam Whitmore. It's very difficult when you're trying to balance a season like this with multiple timelines, the present and the future. It's just a very delicate balance that you're
Yeah.
trying to find there, a very fine line that you're trying to walk. And I guess a lot of this is just an occupational hazard of putting yourself in this situation. You sort of know it going in, but these are the situations, I guess, that result from it, right?
Yeah, and I think you can't overstate. Uh, So Tari and Jabari, not I cannot get the names right today. Tari and Dylan, you can obviously, they're defensive-minded guys. You can obviously tell the difference that they make on this defense. But I think you can't overstate the impact that they also have on offense, because Tari will generate extra possessions. He's not just going to stop the other team. He's going to grab rebounds. He's going to get extra points off in offensive rebound. He's going to get transition buckets out of his steals. And he is more resourceful offensively than Jason Tate, for example. And Dylan Brooks as well. I think part of the reason why we've struggled in late game situations is Dylan has been surprisingly good when you just give him the ball and when he's attacking a closeout in getting those buckets that string together or that keep us afloat a little bit when we're having stretches where just nothing's going in and you go 3 straight minutes scoring 2 points. It's not just the defense that those guys bring. They are categorical upgrades on the guys that are playing right now on both sides of the ball. They're not, Keshante type defensive specialists. They're both better both offensively and defensively. I would argue maybe not if you compare them to Cam offensively, but they're upgrades on both fronts. Not just, it's not just that we hold the Heat to, I think they scored 120 points against us. They had 120. We'd probably hold them to 110 or to 115 if we had those guys. But at the same time, instead of scoring 113, I would guess that we'd score more as well. So it's just wanted to put out there that these guys, while defensive specialists, contribute a lot to the offense as well.
Absolutely. All right, last topic for today's show, because boy, when you give us, well, we're long-winded to begin with, but when we have grievances, which I think we do, even if we're understanding of the reasons why, to go through this stretch of the past week and throw away a game against the Bulls that was winnable on so many fronts. Yeah, we're going to have a lot to say about the reasons why. And I think some of our comments, well, a lot of our comments are just based out of frustration because this recent stretch of the last 4 games, you could just change one or two variables, Tari being one of them, but there's plenty of others as well, as we talked about for the last hour. You could easily be 3-1 instead of 1-3 in multiple games over 500 and very secure in your spot in the Western Conference play-in tournament, as opposed to the half game lead that they will have as they enter play on Friday the 12th. Last topic I want to get to, we're now inside of a month until the February trade deadline. I believe that's on Thursday the 8th. And we did a couple episodes ago our trade season preview show with Karthik Prasad. Nothing that concrete has emerged since then, so I would largely defer to our comments made in the KP episode as far as what the Rockets should and shouldn't do, the outlook entering trade season. And in my opinion, as we expressed back then, it's more likely that any moves of substance are going to be tabled until the off season or even next season's deadline. I think, especially with the Brooklyn draft outlook improving, what you're going to get with those picks, it makes more sense to stand pat and just make moves around the margins using obviously Victor Oladipo's expiring contract. There's a reason why you paid a small premium to get him for Kevin Porter Jr. and retain that salary filler. If you don't use it, you lose it. You've also got the Jock Landale human TPE angle. I think they'll look to move those. And then they've got 3 second-round picks as things currently stand in the 2024 draft, but they're almost certainly not going to have room to roster all of those guys. So at some point between now and the draft, my guess is you're going to see the Rockets try to consolidate those assets. And one opportunity, and this is the one rumor that I could see having legs because it makes sense on multiple fronts. Matt Moore of the Action Network, HP Basketball on Twitter, who we've had on our podcast in the past, I do trust him with intel. I know he has viable contacts around the league. Reports that the Rockets are one of 3 teams, along with the Bulls and the Knicks, to have checked in with the Hawks and expressed interest in trading for AJ Griffin. Griffin was a guy who unexpectedly fell to 16 in the 2022 draft, just one spot ahead of Tari Eason. We were hyping ourselves up on him for a lot of that previous season because there was a 50-50 shot the Rockets would fall to 5. And so we wanted to be okay with the floor scenario. And Griffin was going into the pre-draft process supposed to be the number 5 prospect. As it turns out, he fell in the draft. He had some medical concerns. And I don't think that's really what's happened to him in the NBA. It's more that he just fell out of favor with Quinn Snyder for basketball reasons. He had an encouraging rookie year, averaged about 9 points a game in 19 minutes, shot 39% from threes. That's one of his clear strengths, a 6'6" wing player who can really, really shoot. And then for one reason or another, it's just not working out this year. Atlanta's had a lot of issues, and they're expected to be one of the more aggressive teams at the deadline, making moves really all across the roster, both big names, Dejounte Murray, seen some Trae Young speculation, and then certainly when you look at role players up and down the roster, you could even argue for a Bruno Fernando reunion as a lob threat, although I will not go that far. As far as the Griffin rumor, to me that makes sense because number one, it's not a contending season for the Rockets anyway. They still need high upside guys, and this is a player in only his second season who was considered by most going into that draft as a lottery talent. He shot very well at the NBA level, a decent volume as a rookie. And the Rockets, while the clear need is a backup center, it's also a situation where you can never have too much shooting, especially around Alperen Şengün, who, for reasons we've discussed in recent pods, is increasingly becoming the face of your franchise, and you need better floor spacing. AJ Griffin can definitely help with that. Again, the talent is there. And my guess is that, well, it's not even a guess. I know his value has declined since the 2022 draft. If you're drafted 16 overall and then you're not in the rotation by midway through your team's second year, and it's not even a contending team, we're talking a mediocre team in the Hawks, then no, you're not going to be valued at where you were in the draft process, which was number 16 overall. So maybe there's an opportunity to trade 2 or 3 second round picks that you're not going to have room for anyway, and get an asset that at a bare minimum you can plug into situations where you need a shooter, and maybe because he's under contract, cheap rookie deal for up to 4 years. So you could have him conceivably for 2.5 more years at a very inexpensive rate. Gives you a chance to use your in-house resources, the coaching staff you clearly believe in, led by Ime Udoka, and maybe you can develop him and get more out of him in your system in a way that Atlanta couldn't. So I have not heard AJ's name specifically on the Houston end, so I don't want to make it seem like that I'm verifying it. What I am saying is that to me, that makes perfect sense as the type of guy, high upside, does fill a need, even though he's not a center. You always need shooting, especially if Alperen Şengün is going to be one of your centerpieces. Right now, he's the centerpiece. And he's someone that I think you could acquire using some of those lesser assets. He doesn't make a lot of money, so really it wouldn't even compromise your ability to bring in a backup center, because I'm thinking those typically cost more money given size. So you'd be using Oladipo and Landale for that type of player. You could bring in someone as cheap as an AJ Griffin using picks and a small trade exception, which I believe the Rockets have. So not saying it's happening. Bulls and Knicks may have more incentive to make a move, or maybe the Hawks stand pat because he's a guy that, at least as recently as a year ago, they clearly believed in his talent and they were overjoyed when he fell to them at 16. I would just say on paper, I'm a big fan of that rumor. I liked Griffin going into the 2022 draft. And to me, it just strikes me as the type of opportunity that the Rockets should be looking at to consolidate some of their minor assets they wouldn't be able to roster otherwise. Paulo, is there anything else you wanted to throw in on that front?
Yeah, but personally, I liked AJ Griffin. I wasn't, top 5 high on him, but I like him as a prospect. He had a good rookie season. I was actually surprised that he wasn't making the rotation for the Hawks, but I guess with Sadiq Bey and Jalen Johnson now being on the rise as most improved candidate, I guess it makes sense that he hasn't. His stats for the season haven't been great. And to me, it boils down to the exact same thing that I've said on previous pods about the trade deadline. If you can get him for second round picks, or Keishan Tate or whatever it is, if you keep the Brooklyn pick, to me that's fine.
Yeah, and they could
but
use Tate. That's a good example too.
Yeah, but
He's
I
a
do
winning
think
player that Atlanta could use.
I do think other teams will probably be more not inclined, but they'll probably be more enticed to spend bigger assets on him, just because if we do get him, he's probably not going to get playing time. He's another young guy that's worth playing for sure. So that would make 7, and I'd love the move, right? But he just putting it out there that people would get excited about it, but then he'd probably spend a lot of time in the Q League. So it's the correct type of move where you're you're spending assets, yes, but it's not premium assets, and you're getting a guy that has some upside that you can, in the future you can use. If anything, you can use them in the packet for another star, or you can use them to fill a hole in the rotation when you eventually trade for a star, because it's going to take multiple players eventually when you do, and you're going to need, guys to fill that role. But I'm happy that they have interest in him. It's a player that I would also have interest in, but I think it should be looked at as a move or a move around the margins, and not something that you have high expectations of, at least
Yeah.
for this season.
Yeah. For me, it's more a template. I think it's inherently less likely than likely, but it just strikes me as the type of player, the type of deal that the Rockets should be exploring. Even if there's not a clear hole for those guys on an every game basis, it's the type of player that has a lot of upside, young enough to fit with the longer term blueprint, conceivably can fit if you get the right breaks. At least there's a path, and it allows you to sort of consolidate some of those lesser assets that otherwise you're just not really going to have room for, and thus are going to depreciate in value, because there's just not realistically a way that you can, if you do nothing, use all of those and extract peak value from them. At least this way there's a path, and it's young enough to where not only does an AJ Griffin type help you in the short term potentially, but also the age clearly fits with the Rockets in the big picture, where you're really trying by 2-3 years from now to be at your best and really contending in the Western Conference. All right, I think we've gone on enough today. Thought this would be a shorter show, but boy, I should know better by now. This is who we are, so let's just embrace it. Anyway, we'll bring this one to a close and hopefully have better things to discuss next week. Although keep expectations muted, because after the Detroit game on Friday night, which again almost feels like a must win, things are going to be really difficult next week between Boston, night 2 of a back-to-back. Well, technically that's this week, Saturday, and then Monday in Philly and Wednesday in New York. Going to be a substantial underdog in all of those games. Now, you could point out that Joel Embiid has missed a couple of games of late for the Sixers. Maybe he sits out as well, but the Sixers without Embiid did just beat the Rockets in Houston a couple of weeks ago. So don't want to get too high on the potential of winning in Philly, even if Embiid doesn't play. But certainly that would at least provide a path. And who knows, maybe you get lucky and Dylan Brooks is back by then, as Ime Udoka has hinted at. You can fairly point out, if Dylan returns, that that's someone that you did not have in the first Philly game, and that really hurt you against Tyrese Maxey, who absolutely went off. No one else was capable of staying in front of him on a consistent basis, and he got to the line an absurd amount of time. So knock on wood, hopefully Dylan's able to come back on Monday, because with or without Embiid, you could definitely use Dylan's point of attack defense against Tyrese Maxey. But I think if Embiid plays, even though you'd be better off against Maxey with Dylan, it's still a really tall order to actually win that game against a team that's one of the best in the NBA, just in terms of the raw talent. So anyway, you can always hope, and perhaps the Rockets are due for an uptick after this past week, feeling like, leaving a lot of meat on the bone. Maybe they overachieve. We can certainly hope, but on paper, this is going to be difficult until towards the latter part of this month in early February. The schedule does ease up again, so I think the Rockets can sort of fatten up at that point, and then we'll have more positive stuff to discuss at that point, because we'll be getting closer to the trade deadline. And of course, there's a lot of excitement that comes out that time of year with the rumors and what have you. Anyway, this is where we will stop for today. A couple of plugs to get out before we totally shut this down. Of course, Carbach Brewing is our sponsor of this show, presented by their beer, Clutch City Lager, developed in collaboration with the Houston Rockets. If you want to check out Carbach or Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team, which we produce this show with support from, you can hit up the link tree at the Lager Line, and you can access, again, Carbach, Sports Talk 790, USA Today's Rockets Wire, also our distributors, Apple, Google, Spotify. Subscribe, leave a positive review if you've not already. The bottom line, just go to twitter.com/theloggerline, hit up the link tree in the bio, and you can find all the links you need to the partners and friends of this show. And of course, if you want to follow myself and or Paolo in the interim, you certainly should if you're not already. Again, I'm on Twitter at Ben Dubose, and Paolo is on Twitter, or X, but come on, it's still Twitter, at Paolo Alves NBA. All right, that'll do it for our show on this Friday, January 12th. As always, thanks for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.